He sent the invitation through his assistant, which told her everything she needed to know about the kind of man he had become. Nadia Osei-Boateng, who had once been Nadia Osei before the marriage, and who had gone back to being Nadia Osei-Boateng after the divorce, hyphenating her mother's name back in because she decided she would carry both women forward with her, read the card twice, standing in the kitchen of her Atlanta penthouse in bare feet and a silk robe, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The card was heavy cream stock, engraved rather than printed, which meant someone had spent real money on it. The kind of money that was meant to communicate arrival. The kind of money that was meant to make her feel small. You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Prescott Aldridge and Silvana Beaumont Cruz. She set the card on the counter. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called her chief of staff. "Tell me what's on the calendar for the 14th, she said. "You have the Chicago Infrastructure Summit in the morning and the Morehouse Board dinner at 7. Move the board dinner to the 15th. The summit ends at 2. I'll be back by 6. A pause. "Are you going somewhere that evening?" "I'm going to a wedding," Nadia said. She set her mug in the sink. "Pull the car for 8. What Prescott Aldridge had told people in the years since their divorce was that Nadia had been a liability. Too aggressive, he said. Too focused on the work. He said it with a kind of practiced sadness, the way men say things they want you to believe, costs them something to admit. He said it at dinners and in interviews, and once, memorably, on a podcast that reached about 400,000 listeners, where the host had asked him what he had learned from his first marriage, and Prescott had leaned into the microphone and said, "I learned that ambition without warmth is a kind of loneliness." He did not say that Nadia had been the one to structure the first round of funding for what became Aldridge Capital Partners. He did not mention that she had spent 11 months sleeping 4 hours a night to build the compliance framework that kept the firm from regulatory collapse in its second year. He did not bring up the 2 board members she had personally persuaded to stay when Prescott's recklessness had nearly driven them out. He said she was ambitious. He said she lacked warmth. And then he smiled. And the podcast host nodded. And somewhere in Atlanta, Nadia was in a meeting with 3 senators, negotiating federal broadband access for rural Georgia counties. And she had not listened to the episode, and she would never listen to the episode, because she had stopped paying attention to Prescott Aldridge approximately 14 months after the divorce was finalized, which was the exact amount of time it had taken her to build Osei-Boateng Technologies from a concept she had sketched on a legal pad in her mother's living room in Decatur into a company with its first viable contract. That was 4 years ago. The company now had 212 employees, a federal contract in 3 states, and a valuation that a business magazine had, last spring, described as quietly staggering. The word quietly had made her laugh. She had not done any of it quietly. She had done it at full volume, in rooms where people doubted her, with a precision that she had learned not in any MBA program, but in the 9 years she had spent keeping Prescott's house in order while building something of her own on the margins of his ambition. He had sent the invitation because he wanted her to come and feel diminished. She knew this, the way she knew most things about Prescott. From the accumulated data of a decade of close observation, the way you come to understand a recurring pattern in a system you have studied long enough. He had found a woman who was younger and easier and less demanding. A woman who appeared in his Instagram stories, holding cocktails at resort pools. A woman who did not have strong opinions about compliance frameworks or board composition. And he wanted Nadia to see that he had upgraded, in the exact way a man uses that word when he means something ugly and cannot quite bring himself to say it plainly. She was going to come. She had decided this in the kitchen in the first 30 seconds after reading the card. But she was not going to feel diminished. She arrived at the venue, a restored estate in Buckhead, the kind of property that rented for $30,000 a weekend and came with its own sommelier. At 8:47, on a Saturday, which was 13 minutes into the cocktail hour and exactly late enough to matter. She came through the main entrance with her head of operations, a tall, precise man named Roland, who had spent 12 years in private security before she hired him, and two of his team members, both of whom wore dark suits and had the specific stillness of people who were trained to see everything without appearing to look at anything. She wore a dress the color of deep burgundy that her stylist had sent from a designer whose name Prescott would recognize, though he would not know from looking at it what it had cost, which was fine. She was not there to display a price tag. She was there because she had been invited. And she was a woman who honored her commitments, and she had committed to arriving. The room noticed her before Prescott did. That was the nature of rooms. They have a collective awareness that moves faster than any individual inside them. A woman near the bar touched her companion's arm. A man in a linen blazer paused mid-sentence. The wedding planner, a compact woman with a clipboard, made brief eye contact with Roland and then looked away. Prescott was near the fireplace with his groomsmen when he saw her. She watched his expression change from the other side of the room, the way the easy confidence in his face shifted into something that was not quite recognition, and not quite alarm but occupied the uncomfortable space between them. She watched him process it. The invitation. The presence. She gave him a small nod across the room. Professional. Cordial. The nod of a woman who had no unfinished business. He looked at Roland, then at the two men with Roland, then back at her. She was already turning to speak to someone she had recognized near the bar. Whitmore, who ran a commercial real estate firm she had met at a conference in Houston, and his wife, a pediatric surgeon whose name Nadia had remembered, and whose work she had followed because she made a practice of remembering the people who were worth remembering. Nadia, Whitmore said, and his face opened with genuine pleasure in the way people's faces do when they encounter someone whose company they have actually enjoyed. I didn't know you'd be here. Prescott and I go way back, she said simply, and ordered a sparkling water with lime. What happened over the next 2 hours did not happen because Nadia planned it. This is important to understand, and it is the part that the people who were there would get wrong in the retelling, because they would want there to be a plan. They would want her to have come in with a strategy, with documents, with something up her sleeve. It made for a better story that way. It made her the architect of his downfall. But she had simply come to a wedding. She had come because she refused to be the kind of person who declined invitations out of fear. And she had refused to be the kind of person who could be diminished by proximity to a man who had chosen to dismiss her. She came the way she came into every room she entered, as herself, completely, without apology or concealment. What happened was that the room was full of people who knew her work. This was the thing Prescott had not calculated, or perhaps he had calculated it and had underestimated it, which was the mistake he had always been most prone to making. He was good at seeing what was in front of him and bad at seeing around corners. The wedding was full of people from Atlanta's business and civic community, the same community in which Nadia Osei-Boateng Technologies had spent 3 years becoming quietly, staggeringly present. The woman in the green silk near the window was on the board of a regional bank that had recently financed one of Nadia's expansion projects. The two men by the terrace doors ran a construction firm that had partnered with Osei-Boateng Tech on infrastructure work in Fulton County. The older woman with silver locks, an expression of alert intelligence sitting near the floral arrangement, was a city council member who had stood in Nadia's office 8 months ago and said, flatly and without sentimentality, "You have built something real here." They came to her, one by one, in the organic way. People come to someone they are genuinely glad to see. They shook her hand. They said her name. They said the name of her company. They said things like the Fulton contract has already made a measurable difference, and I was hoping we'd run into each other. I wanted to ask about the Q1 expansion, and my daughter just got hired by your engineering team. She hasn't stopped talking about the culture. Prescott watched this from across the room. She did not watch him watching her. She did not need to. The dinner was seated. She found her place card. Third table from the front, slightly off-center. The kind of placement that telegraphed you have been included but not honored. And she sat and she talked to the woman on her left, a landscape architect named Theodora, who had just returned from a project in Accra, and the man on her right, a retired federal judge who had a dry wit and opinions about infrastructure funding that she found genuinely interesting. She ate the salmon. She drank the sparkling water. She was present and warm, and she did not perform anything. Across the room, at the head table, she could see Prescott and his new wife, Silvana, who was lovely in the way that people are lovely when they have not yet been tested, with a brightness in her eyes that Nadia recognized as the brightness of someone who believed she had landed somewhere safe. Nadia felt something for her. Not the sharp thing she might have expected, not bitterness or satisfaction, but something quieter and more complicated, close to concern. She hoped the woman had read the fine print. She hoped she had her own lawyer. The speeches began. The best man spoke. Prescott's brother spoke. A college friend of Silvana's spoke and made a joke about love being the only merger that mattered. And people laughed. Then Prescott's business partner, a man named Fenwick, who had a tendency to drink more than he should at events where there was an open bar, took the microphone. He was loose-limbed and expansive in the way of men who feel themselves to be among friends, and he talked about Prescott for several minutes, about what he had built, about his vision, about the company that was going public in the spring. And then Fenwick said, raising his glass, to the man who built something from nothing, who started with an idea and turned it into a legacy. No one helped him get there. He did it himself. That's the kind of man Prescott is. The room raised their glasses. Nadia raised hers. She drank. She did not say anything. She did not need to. But the woman on her left, Theodora, the landscape architect who had been in Accra and who had no particular stake in any of this, leaned slightly toward her and said, in a voice that was quiet, but not quite quiet enough, "Is that true? He did it himself?" And Nadia smiled the smile she had learned to give to that particular question. The smile that was not a confirmation and not a denial, but simply the expression of a woman who had made peace with the difference between what was said and what was known. And Theodora looked at her for a moment longer, and then said, even more quietly, "Right." After the dinner, in the corridor near the coat check, Prescott found her. She had expected this. She had been waiting for it, with the patience of someone who has learned that things arrive when they arrive. He had lost some of the easy confidence from earlier in the evening. He was carrying a champagne glass and standing in the way of a man who was trying to appear casual while experiencing something that was not casual at all. "You came," he said. "You invited me," she said. He looked at Roland, who was standing at a respectful distance. "Did you need to bring? They go where I go," she said. "You know how it is. A woman in my position." She let that settle. "Congratulations, Prescott. She seems wonderful." He searched her face for something. For the wound, she thought, the wound he had been counting on being there so he could feel justified in having made it. Men like Prescott needed the wound. They needed the evidence of damage to confirm that they had once been powerful enough to cause it. Without the wound, the whole logic of the invitation collapsed. She gave him nothing. Not out of coldness. She was not cold. But because there was genuinely nothing to give. The wound had healed. The scar had become so much a part of her that she no longer noticed it. She had built something on top of it, the way cities build on rock, and the building was what mattered now. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. His voice had changed, lower, slightly rougher, the way voices get when the performance drops and the actual person shows up. "Why did you come?" Really, she considered this. It was the first honest question he had asked her in years, possibly ever, and it deserved an honest answer. "Because I wanted to," she said. "Because I was invited, and I don't decline things out of fear. And because I wanted to be in a room full of people I respect, and it turned out you'd invited most of them." He absorbed this. Behind him, through the door, she could hear the band starting up again, something slow and orchestral. "Nadia," he said, "I know I didn't. I know there were things I should have. He stopped. He looked at the champagne glass. He was trying, she realized, and doing it badly, the way people try when they have waited too long, and the moment has largely passed. But she acknowledged the trying because she had not become the kind of woman who withheld that. You built something real, she said. I hope you know that. And I built something real. And both of those things are true, and neither of them cancels the other out. She put her hand briefly on his arm, a light touch, a gesture between former associates, which is what they were. Go back to your wife. It's your wedding night. He nodded. He started to say something else and then didn't. He walked back through the door, and she watched him go. Roland materialized at her elbow. Cars out front, he said. Give me 5 minutes, she said. She walked to the window at the end of the corridor that looked out over the estate garden, lit up soft gold. In the late evening, the trees strung with small lights that reflected off the pond below. A heron stood at the edge of the water, still as a sculpture, watching something beneath the surface with the focused patience of a creature that had learned not to hurry its own arrival. She stood there for 5 minutes, not thinking about Prescott, not thinking about the speech or the room or the recognition she had received from people who had said her name with respect. She was thinking about her mother's living room in Decatur, the yellow couch that had a spring gone soft on the left side, the legal pad on the coffee table, the late afternoon light coming through the window that faced the neighbor's oak tree. She was thinking about the woman who had sat on that couch with a pen and a sheet of paper and had begun, with the specific calm of someone who has decided to stop waiting for permission to write down what she was going to build. The story that circulated afterward, in the community, in the business circles that overlapped with the wedding guest list, in the particular social register that keeps score of these things, was not the story Prescott had intended to generate. He had intended to generate, in the minds of everyone present, a particular image. Himself, triumphant and remade, the previous chapter neatly closed. His first wife arriving as a subordinate note in the margins of his celebration, a footnote, confirming her own footnote status. What the room had actually seen was something different. They had seen a woman who entered without performing anything and was recognized genuinely by the people worth being recognized by. They had seen her speak with a council member, a banker, 2 contractors, a federal judge, a landscape architect, who had been to Accra. They had seen her sit straight and eat her salmon and listen more than she spoke, and when she spoke, they had leaned in. The council member called her the following Monday. The banker sent an email on Sunday evening with a subject line that read simply, "Good to see you Saturday. Wanted to follow up on something." The woman who had been sitting 2 tables over, whose daughter had just joined the engineering team, left a voicemail that began, I know this is an unusual way to reach out, but I was at the Aldridge wedding and I wanted to say, and ended with a request for a meeting that Nadia accepted. Prescott went on his honeymoon to St. Lucia. His firm, Aldridge Capital Partners, delayed its planned public offering by 60 days in March, citing market conditions. This happened to coincide with a regulatory inquiry that had been opened the previous fall and about which his team had assured investors there was nothing to be concerned about. Nadia did not know about the inquiry. She had not known about it at the wedding. She had not come to the wedding knowing that anything would unravel. She had come because she was not afraid, and she had behaved as she always behaved. And the rest had taken care of itself in the way that things do when a person has spent years building something solid in a world that is always, eventually, sorting the solid from the hollow. In April, a journalist who was writing a profile of Osei-Boateng Technologies for a national magazine asked her, in a recording studio on the 14th floor of an office building in Midtown, whether there were people from her past who had underestimated her and whether she wanted to speak to that. She thought about the question. The journalist was young, 26 or 7, with the eager precision of someone who believed in the revelatory power of the right question. She deserved a real answer. People underestimate everyone, Nadia said. That's not specific to me. People look at you and decide what you are before they have the information. And then the information arrives, and they have to decide whether to update or to defend the original assessment. She paused. Some people update. Those are the people I keep working with. The others. She lifted one shoulder. Not quite a shrug, something more final than that. The others are just part of the landscape. But it doesn't hurt you? The journalist asked. When someone writes you off. Nadia looked at her. I didn't say it doesn't hurt. I said it doesn't stop me. Those are two very different things. The journalist wrote it down. When the profile ran 6 weeks later, that line was the pull quote, set in large type across the page, and her mother called her from the yellow couch in Decatur, the same couch, spring still gone soft on the left side, and read the quote aloud, and then was quiet for a moment, and then said, That's exactly right, baby. That's exactly right. Nadia was in her office when her mother called. She was standing at the window, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. The city spread wide and bright below her in the late morning, humming with all its ordinary and extraordinary business. She stayed on the phone with her mother for 40 minutes. She did not look at her inbox. She did not return emails. She listened to her mother's voice. She thought about the legal pad. She thought about what it meant to begin something in a room where no one was watching, and to continue it until the room had no choice but to turn around. There is a specific kind of strength that is not dramatic. It does not arrive with music. It does not announce itself in the moment of its greatest effort. It simply continues. Through the closed doors and the misdirected invitations, through the speeches that erase you and the rooms that have to decide whether to see you. And it does this not because it is invincible, but because it has decided that continuing is what it does. The heron at the edge of the pond had not moved when she looked back. It was still watching. It was still waiting. It had its eye on something beneath the surface that no one else could see yet. She understood that. She had always understood that. She picked up her pen. There was more work to do.